Okay. We have your written testimony, so and I know you were just visiting with us about a week ago, so but if you could just make whatever introductory you like, and then we'll have questions.
Sure. Good afternoon, Councilman. My name is Marcel Pratt. I officially became the city solicitor this past Thursday, April 19th, upon City Council's confirmation of my appointment, for which I am grateful.
Hold on, Ms. Pratt, hold on. If I could ask everybody, please. I know you're trying to talk low, but 8 people talking low isn't low. Sorry, Mr. Pratt, please.
Sure. Thank you, Councilman. At this table, I am joined by First Deputy Craig Straw and Deputy Administrative Solicitor Donna Muzak. Also present today are 2 of our department chairs, Valerie Robinson, Chair of the Corporate and Tax Group, and Vanessa Garrett-Harley, Chair of our Social Services Group, as well as several chiefs of units within the Law Department. I also want to thank Steve Ludovico, our Director of Administrative Services, for his efforts in preparing our budget documents. As you said, you have copies of my written testimony already, and unless you object, I incorporate those remarks by reference and will just provide a brief summary.
Sure.
First, we are requesting $251,478 over last year's Class 100 budget to cover DC 33 salary increases and 4 new positions that are critical to our ongoing operations, which I'm happy to talk about in further detail. Next, I would also like to provide you with the status on some of our high-profile cases that we will continue to work on this fiscal year. As Council is aware, Law continues to defend the Philadelphia beverage tax in court. Working closely with outside counsel, Law defended the tax and prevailed in Commonwealth Court. And this past January, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said it would hear the appeal. Briefing has been completed, and we are in preparation for oral argument, which is scheduled for May 15th in Harrisburg. On sanctuary cities, as you know, the city filed suit to prohibit the U.S. Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, from imposing 3 new and unprecedented immigration-related conditions on the federal burn JAG grants. The city obtained a preliminary injunction, and we are scheduled to go to trial on April 30th, which will hopefully result in a final judgment not only deeming the U.S. Attorney General's conduct unconstitutional, but also ordering DOJ to release funds to the city. The city's lawsuit against Wells Fargo was filed on May 15, 2017, alleging that Wells Fargo violated the Fair Housing Act by engaging in discriminatory mortgage lending practices against African American and Latino residents of Philadelphia. This January, a federal district court rejected the bank's attempt to dismiss the city's case, and as a result, the case is moving forward into discovery. This past January, the city also filed a lawsuit against several manufacturers of prescription opioids, seeking, among other things, to end the ongoing deceptive marketing practices and to recover money from the manufacturers to pay for the treatment of city residents suffering from opioid addiction. The many cases filed by several municipalities have been transferred to the Delaware County Court of Common Pleas just for pretrial coordination. And these are just 2 examples of how affirmative litigation can be used as a powerful tool in addressing harms done to our city. And lastly, I remain committed to ensuring diversity within the department and will ensure that diverse candidates are part of the candidate pool and our hiring panels are diverse. With your approval, I am very excited that we plan on hiring our first ever Director of Professional Development, Diversity, and Inclusion this year, which is the special assistant position identified in our budget testimony. This position will have a tremendous impact on our recruitment efforts and our ability to provide comprehensive legal training. I would be happy to take any questions you may have. Thanks.
All right, thank you, sir. Excuse me. You talked about the sanctuary cities
Yes.
issue, and I think it's been discussed previously that the city would be financially liable if we honored an ICE detainer on illegal U.S. citizens. It was seen in Lehigh and Allegheny counties. What is the potential liability associated with honoring a detainer or not honoring a detainer?
Yeah, that's right. And the legal case you're referring to is a decision by the Third Circuit. It's called the Galarza decision. And essentially, if a municipality holds someone without probable cause to do so, or just without any constitutional authority, the city can be liable under federal law for example, under 1983, and the damages can vary, but they can be substantial. And that's one of the primary reasons why we don't think the city should honor ICE detainers, but instead require judicial warrants to accompany them, because if there's a signed criminal judicial warrant by a federal judge, we know that all the constitutional protections have been satisfied.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. In regard to the beverage tax, in the budget detail, there's several class 250 contracts for the litigation.
Yes.
What's been the cost to defend the beverage tax so far?
So far, the costs are around $1.5 million, and that's for the two firms that are helping out. I will say what the numbers don't reflect is that we did get a grant from the Arnold Foundation to offset some of the legal costs in the amount of $500,000, for which the law department in the city is very grateful. So that number just has to be taken into account when thinking about the overall cost to the city. But we have been very judicious in spending on the beverage tax, and we realize that it is probably the most expensive litigation that we have this year.
Yeah. Yeah, we knew it was going to take a while when it started, right? And how many employees are currently working from the law department on it versus the contract attorneys? Would you know offhand?
So yes, right now it's myself. I spend a significant amount of time working on the case. Richie Fader, who's head of our legislation unit, works on the case as well. Francis Beckley, who is chief counsel to revenue, works on the case as well. And over time, we've had some support from the affirmative and general litigation unit by way of Eleanor Ewing, who's the chief, as well as Dimitri Mavroudis, who's a deputy in that unit. And from the firms, it's hard to say how many exactly, but I would say between both firms, at various times, not all together, but we've had as little as 3 attorneys working on it from the firms, and as many as 8 or 9, depending on where we were in the litigation.
Okay, all right, gotcha. Thank you. And I have to put on record, I want to personally thank you for all the work you've done on the wage history bill that is being fought also. I know we're in federal court on that, so
yes.
Thank you for all the efforts you put forth on that.
Thank you, Councilman, and we're still
shame we have to do it, but I'll reserve any other comment on that. Councilwoman Sanchez.
Thank you. Councilman Greenlee asked me to be real short, so lucky you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As you know, during your confirmation, one of the things I talked about the law department is because of all the lawsuits, sanctuary cities, which we're very appreciative of, and some of the other issues, little time has been spent on administrative review. And I noticed that for one of your performance standards, you put in the contracts and the approval and the process of contracts from 9 to 11 days to back to 9 days. What other administrative reviews are you going to be looking at as it relates to not only time frame but paperwork related between contract development and conforming? You know, what is in your review right now? What do you think are some of the challenges there?
So first, I'll just say that both for contracts that law drafts and contracts that the departments draft, the time that is spent in law has declined substantially. Mm-hmm. I think for contracts that law drafts, the amount of time spent in law has gone down to 37 days this year from 43 last year, and then for contracts that the departments draft, it's gone down from...
I mean, these are standard contracts we do every year.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it taking so long? Do we not have some standard boilerplate stuff?
We do, but sometimes, for example, the vendor will disagree with what's in the general provisions. So the general provisions are boilerplate, mm-hmm. but some vendors might take issue with a certain provision, and we'll have to.
So why are we
go back and
spending
forth.
time accommodating vendors? They either want the contract or they don't.
Yeah,
particularly, I mean, we have such a bad number
right.
around diversity, participation, and inclusion. Why are we accommodating vendors?
I agree. I mean, sometimes it might be we have a contract for a very specialized area of law, and it could be a firm with either a niche practice or a specific lawyer who has a very unique set of skills that we want. But again, we don't just give up everything for any one person. But they might have some leverage in that situation that requires us to negotiate. But the numbers also reflect that for some of the contracts, if there is an issue, for example, with the department negotiating with the vendor, or there's just a mistake in the process, instead of us rejecting the contract, we'll let it sit in law while the vendor or while the department remedies some of the issues. Because if we were to reject it, that would just elongate the timeline.
So the practice, because we did a resolution last week, we really want to begin to look at some of the contracting issues in our enterprise funds, because there's been very little scrutiny around that, and that's where we don't have the level of inclusion and participation we want. So from, our inability to debundle and some of those other issues. So why are departments creating their own legal framework, and is that standard practice? Because at one point, for me, it's so challenging to understand how we don't have some basic matrix and standards around contracting. And while I agree that departments should be given some level of discretion, the fact that we don't have standards has created kind of this disparity. So now we're opening up everything to look at what are we doing. So is that best practices to have departments do it? And then what is the correlation between what the department does and your review and your ability to accept or reject?
Yeah, I think that we do have some standards. So my understanding is that the drafts of contracts that departments use are templates that we've provided. So
how about for the RFP, RFQ? What role does the law department take in reviewing any of that before that goes out?
Yeah, again, I think a lot of that is standard, and if we're asked to review, I think we will review, but for the most part, it's up to departments to review and post their own RFPs. Now, for our particular RFPs, obviously, it's different, but I think the role with other departments can vary.
Okay. Do you do any review around the generation of contracts and liability for the city? So, one of my biggest issues in our procurement reform process has been seeing the level of non-conforming contracts we have mid-year, right? And what kind of financial liability exposure as a government we put out when people are just operating on these letters of agreement. Because I believe there's a cost to that, right? People operate for 6 months and then we negotiate the annual amount. And there's Vanessa shaking her head over there, especially on the DHS side, right? So what role do you play in that, in looking at the accountability around what's best practices for when we should have legally binding conforming contracts?
Yeah, I think it's always best to have a contract in place as soon as possible. I do think that we're able to, in a lot of situations, have a notice to proceed, which does outline or lay out some of the terms of a contract. But no, I agree. The best practice would be just to have a written contract in place as soon as possible. I know the issue for some situations could be that whatever the need is from the vendor, it's needed on a very timely or rapid basis, and we just need to get somebody to work as soon as possible, and there might be a lag between.
We use that as an excuse to pay more and not get quality, and then not get inclusion and not get diversity. So I'm trying to move away from that, which is why I'm trying to look at what are the standards, what is best practice, what is the matrix, and I think that the law department should have a say in that, as I think procurement should have a say. And there's all this discretion at the departments, but no standards, right? So for us, particularly, again, water and enterprise funds that we've never looked at because it doesn't go to our general fund. So who in your team could we add to that discussion? Because we are going to have public hearings around this, and we are setting up some matrix. Can you submit to the chair what your role is right now in the decision-making and review process as it relates to?
Yeah, we can put something in writing and submit that.
So that we can figure out at what point we have law department in the conversations as we begin to meet with some of the departments and prepare for public testimony on
Okay,
that.
I'm happy to do that.
Last, because again, Greenlee said I had to hurry up.
Don't blame me now, come on.
The issue of lawsuits and settlements and our indemnity fund, I know that the last couple of years, the numbers have been a little off whack as SOSI tried to move a lot of what was in our portfolio out. Where are we as it relates to that?
Yeah, so our indemnities fund is about 55 million, and I think right now we have about 14 million left, which is good for this time of year. And I credit that to a number of things. First, I think attorneys in our department have just been very successful at winning cases. I think the number of cases that we've closed without payment have increased significantly from a percentage basis. But also we haven't had as many big settlements or big cases this year. Now that said, we still have some time left in this fiscal year, and there are some other liabilities out there. But I think as far as this past year is concerned, we've been pretty good with the numbers.
Okay. And then lastly, the issue of settlements around collections, do you keep any matrix about what original debts versus settlement rates across the board? Is there any data around that you could share with the administration?
I don't have that handy, but I could. And when you say collections, are you referring to?
So, every time we're doing payment compliance for poor people, right, there's always this notion that people need to pay their bills, right, as in they're making vacation plans as opposed to paying their bills. But I want to look at how does the other side of the ledger look for when we do big settlements around big debt? Is there a pattern, a forgiveness with the big folks that's comparable to what we're asking poor people to pay? Okay.
Yeah, I don't have those metrics handy, but I think that's something we
can we look at that? And I say that because part of our water negotiations where we wanted to do a principal forgiveness. So really what I'm looking at, just so that you know, is when have we forgiven principal, how many times for big guys in comparison to our ratepayers and our taxpayers.
Okay. And we can work with your office to identify what the thresholds are for.
I just want to know when we do principal forgiveness for any other thing, when people are settling up or going into bankruptcy, in comparison to the notion of ratepayers and taxpayers.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you, and I'm going to let you off the hook.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Excellent questions there. Just one last thing I know the Council President wanted to raise. Over the past 3 fiscal years, there's been fluctuations in your Class 200 budget, and I know you were pretty high in 17, 8.2 million. Any particular reason why that was higher, or? If you don't know now, you can get
the class, I have it handy. So the issue is that some of the numbers here that are reported, they report contracts that are ran through law but not funded by law. So for example, the Community Legal Services contract is initiated by law, but it's not funded by us, and that's a pretty substantial contract. And that number actually includes 2 years worth of amendments because the amendment for FY16 was processed late.
So they went into 17?
So yeah, it's ballooned the number, but that number is a little bit, I don't want to say misleading, but it doesn't reflect the contracts that law funds itself, but it includes some other law-related contracts that are pretty substantial.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, is there no other? Councilwoman Sanchez.
So related to that, to the water forgiveness that we've not been successful in getting, if you can't make this commitment now, if you can send something in writing, we've been trying to get a commitment that there will be no foreclosures based on water debt, and that includes when water and real estate are added for owner-occupied properties.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to give that some thought. That's a policy decision, and I think I'd have to consult a lot of folks around that.
So we're going to ask you this on the record every single time you come up until we get the answer we want.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you very much. No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you,
I know you were just with us, so I know there's a lot of questions a couple weeks ago. So, and again, congratulations on
Thank you,
your
Councilman.
appointment.
Appreciate that.
Good luck.